So you decided to make me a widow, to fake your death and disappear. That was your solution, leaving me to believe you burned alive, to cry over an empty coffin. At this, Amara let out a strangled cry herself. Fake your death, Kunle? What is she talking about? Chioma Nwosu's white lace wedding gown shimmered in the golden afternoon light streaming through the church windows. She stood at the altar of a packed Lagos church, her hand trembling in Oluwaseun Adeyemi's gentle grasp. It was the happiest day of her life, as the officiating pastor declared them husband and wife. Tears of joy welled up in Chioma's eyes. Seun smiled at her with such warmth and devotion that her heart swelled. In that moment, surrounded by music and jubilant ululations from their families, Chioma felt certain that their love would last forever. After the ceremony, they emerged into the humid Lagos evening, greeted by cheers. Chioma's Igbo relatives from Enugu danced alongside Sheu's Yoruba family from Ibadan, blending traditions in a vibrant display of unity. Sheu twirled Chioma around in her flowing gown, making her laugh in delight as their friends clapped and took pictures. Under the twinkling lights at the reception later that night, Sheu gave a heartfelt toast, promising to always protect her and make her happy. Chioma dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, overwhelmed by emotion. She had never felt so loved and certain of anything as she did about Sheu at that moment. In the early days of their marriage, that promise felt unbreakable. They settled into a cozy home in Surulere, where every corner held the warmth of their hopes and dreams. Chioma, a dedicated school teacher, would come home in the afternoons with funny stories about her primary school students. Sheu would listen with a wide grin as he loosened his tie after a long day running his small logistic company. He often brought her suya, spicy grilled meat, from a roadside vendor on his way back from work, teasing that he only married her for her love of tasty street food. In turn, she would cook his favorite egusi soup on Sundays, laughing when he insisted her Igbo style recipe was almost as good as his mother's Yoruba version. Their love was tender and playful. Late at night, they would lie in bed whispering about their future, children they hoped to have someday, the house they wanted to build in a quieter neighborhood away from the city's bustle. On rainy evenings when thunder rattled their windows, Chioma would coil into Sheu's arms and feel utterly safe. He would stroke her hair and call her Nkem, my own, assuring her that he would always be by her side. If she woke from a bad dream, he would light a candle and pray with her until she felt peace again. Sometimes, Chioma marveled at how lucky she was. In her mid-20s, she had found a good man who treated her with respect and kindness. Many of her friends were still searching for love or stuck in an unhappy relationships. But she and Sheu were best friends as much as husband and wife. She remembered one Saturday when she had fallen ill with a high fever. Sheu cancelled his business meetings to stay home and tend to her. He placed a cool cloth on her forehead and made a peppery chicken stew, just like her late mother used to do, gently coercing her to eat a few spoonfuls. "Anything for my chi," he would say with a playful grin, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead. Moments like that made her chest bloom with gratitude and love for him. Yet, as months turned into a couple of years, subtle shadows crept into their bright world. It began with the way Sheu's warm laughter grew less frequent. His logistic business faced mounting challenges, port delays that stranded shipments, the rising cost of diesel fuel, clients who paid their invoices late or not at all. In the evenings, Chioma noticed Seun massaging his temples more often, his face drawn in worry as the nightly news droned on the TV. She would ask if he was okay, and each time he flashed a quick reassuring smile. "I'm fine, my love," he insisted. "Just a long day, nothing to worry about." She wanted to believe him. She would rub his shoulders, feeling the tension coiled in his muscles, and urge him to get some rest. He might relax for a short while, but the worries always seemed to return. He tried to downplay it with a weak joke about angry customers and delivery vans perpetually stuck in Lagos traffic. Chioma didn't laugh. She sat beside him on the couch, laying a hand on his knees. "We're in this together," she whispered, searching his eyes in the semi-darkness. "If something is wrong, we can fix it." For a moment, Seun's lips parted, as if he were about to spill the heavy secret weighing on his shoulder. His eyes glistened with emotion and worry, raw and unguarded. But just as quickly, he looked away and swallowed hard. He cupped her cheek and forced a small smile. "It's fine, really, it's fine. Go back to sleep," he murmured, kissing her forehead with distracted lips. "I promise, I'll sort everything out." Reluctantly, Chioma returned to bed, but she couldn't shake the sense that her husband was drifting to a place where she could not reach him. Unknown to her, Seun's problems ran far deeper than a few delayed shipments. In a bid to grow Adeyemi Logistics, he had taken out hefty loans from both the bank and some private lenders during a boom time when business was good. But a major contract fell through without warning, and a downturn in the economy choked many of his clients. He found himself scrambling to stay afloat as bills piled high. Debt mounted like storm clouds on the horizon, dark and menacing. Each week brought new phone calls that he quickly silenced and letters he left unopened on his desk. There were tense meetings with stern-faced creditors he never mentioned to his wife. Pride gnawed at him. He was determined to solve it alone and shield Chioma from his failures. The shame of admitting how badly he had mismanaged things was more than he could bear. Later at night, when Chioma was fast asleep, a single tear would sometimes slip from Seun's eyes as he lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. In those lonely hours, he felt the walls of his life closing in, squeezing out the air. He began avoiding their cheerful nightly chats and became more withdrawn. Chioma sensed that he was hiding something, but whenever she pressed gently, he deflected her concern with a peck on her cheek or a weary sigh. At school, she found herself increasingly distracted, her mind wandering from lesson plans to her husband's welfare. She would worry if Seun had managed to eat lunch or whether he was safe driving on the chaotic expressways with his deliveries. One breezy afternoon, as she graded homework under the shade of a mango tree in the schoolyard, her friend and fellow teacher Nneka noticed the faraway look in her eyes. "Chioma, is everything alright at home? You seem a million miles away today," Nneka asked softly. Chioma offered a faint smile and shrugged. "I'm okay, maybe just a little tired," she replied, not meeting her friend's eyes. She wasn't one to easily share her worries. In her heart, she hoped it was just a rough patch that would soon pass, that her loving husband would return to his old cheerful self once the stress eased. But the strain in their home only grew. One evening, Seun came home unusually late, well past dinner time. By the time the clock neared midnight, Chioma was frantic. She had tried calling him repeatedly, but each call went unanswered. Feeding her dread, she paced the length of their small living room, imagining terrible possibilities with every passing minute. When the front door finally creaked open, she rushed over, her heart pounding, Shehu stood in the doorway, looking exhausted and disheveled. His normally crisp shirt was wrinkled and untucked, and his eyes were bloodshot. Relief flooded through Chioma that he was alive and safe, but it quickly mingled with hurt and anger. Shehu, what happened? I've been so worried, she exclaimed, her voice trembling. It's almost midnight. I called and called. Why didn't you answer? Tears of stress were bright in her eyes. He looked at her, guilt and fatigue etched on his face, as if struggling to find an explanation. I'm sorry, he finally mumbled. The meeting ran long. Without another word, he shuffled past her and collapsed onto the couch, avoiding her gaze. The sharp scent of alcohol wafted from his clothes, an unfamiliar smell on him. Chioma's heart sank. This was so unlike the man she knew. She knelt down beside him and took his hand, alarmed to feel it cold and clammy despite the warm night. Her own hands trembled. Talk to me, please, she pleaded softly, searching his face. Her mind swelled with fear. Had there been an accident? Was someone threatening him? Still, Shehu refused to explain further. He squeezed her hand weakly and shook his head. I'm handling it. I'll be fine. It's under control. He muted, the words lowering slightly from fatigue or drink. His haunted eyes were rimmed red, and he did not offer anything more. That night, they slept back to back for the first time since their wedding. Shehu passed into a restless stupor almost immediately. Beside him, Chioma lay awake for hours, silent tears soaking her pillow. The gulf between them felt as wide and dark as the ocean, and she didn't know how to bridge it. In desperation, she pressed her palms together and prayed in the darkness, whispering, God, whatever this is, please help us through it, please. In her wildest nightmares, she never could have imagined what her husband was contemplating, nor the storm that was about to sweep through their lives and tear her world apart. It happened on a cloudy afternoon about 2 weeks after that tense night. Shehu had grown increasingly skittish and distant. He would flinch when his phone rang and step outside to take hushed calls. Chioma often caught him staring off into space with an expression that chilled her, a mix of despair and grim resolve. She felt him slipping away, but every time she tried to pull him back with love, he only smiled weakly and assured her everything would be alright soon. On that fateful day, Shehu claimed he had to drive to Benin City for an urgent meeting with a potential client. He kissed Chioma goodbye in the morning, holding her a little too tightly, as if memorizing the feel of her. I'll be back by tomorrow, I promise, he said softly, his eyes lingering on her face. She brushed the hand over his cheek, noticing it was damp with perspiration even in the cool morning air. Something in his voice, in that embrace, made her heart flutter with unspoken worry. Still, she forced a smile and straightened his collar. Drive safely, okay? I love you, she whispered. He pressed his forehead to hers for a fleeting moment. I love you too, always, came his reply, heavy with emotion. Then he turned and walked to his car, giving her one last wave before driving off. Chioma stood in the doorway watching until his blue sedan disappeared into the rush of Lagos traffic. Hours later, as dusk settled, Chioma was at home, marking her student exercise books, when her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. She almost let it ring through, expecting a spam call, but something in her gut urged her to answer. The voice on the other end introduced himself as a police officer. Chioma's stomach tightened, and her heart kicked against her ribs. Her mind immediately jumped to Shehu. The officer's tone was somber yet gentle. but nothing could soften the horror of his words. There had been a major accident on the expressway that afternoon. A tanker truck's brakes had failed, causing a multi-vehicle collision and a terrible fire. One of the cars involved, a blue sedan, was engulfed in flames. The license plate had been traced back to Seun Adeyemi. Chioma's vision blurred. No, there must be a mistake, she whispered, voice thin as paper. She realized she had risen to her feet, the notebook spilling from the lap onto the floor. The officer continued carefully. The fire had been severe. They found remains in the driver's seat of the sedan, but the victim was burned beyond recognition. He paused as Chioma let out a strangled whimper. They were working to identify the body, he said softly, but based on the car's registration and personal item recovered from the scene, her husband's briefcase, some documents with his name, they were certain it was Seun. No, Chioma gasped. Her knees buckled as the room began to spin. She sank to the floor, the phone slipping from her hand. Faintly, she heard the officer's distant voice cracking through the receiver. Madam, are you there? But Chioma could not respond. A keening wail rose from the depth of her soul, a raw animal sound of pain that she could not control. It burst out of her, filling the small living room with anguish. The next hours passed in a foggy haze of disbelief. Word spread quickly, and soon Nneka rushed over to the apartment as soon as she heard the news. She found Chioma collapsed on the rug, clutching one of Seun's shirts from the laundry basket. Chioma had pulled it out in her confusion, and now she pressed it to her face, soaking the fabric with her tears. Gently, Nneka knelt and wrapped her arms around her friend, rocking her back and forth as Chioma sobbed uncontrollably. It can't be true. It can't be true, Chioma choked out over and over, shaking her head in denial. Nneka's own eyes brimmed with tears, but she kept murmuring softly, I'm here, Chioma, I'm here. I've got you. By the following day, the grim reality became inescapable. Tunde, Seun's close friend, went with police officers to the accident site to assist however he could. He recognized what was left of Seun's car, though the blue sedan was now nothing but a charred, twisted shell. Among the wreckage, they recovered a few personal items that had somehow survived the blaze. A wristwatch Chioma had given Seun on their first anniversary, its face cracked and blackened by heat, and a gold wedding band, charred but still unmistakably the same ring that had never left Seun's finger. When Tunde brought these items to Chioma later that day and placed them gently into her trembling hands, the last fragile hope she had been holding onto shattered. There was no denying it now. These were Seun's belongings. He was gone. A howl of grief tore from deep in Chioma's chest as she clutched the burned wedding ring to her heart. She doubled over, rocking back and forth on the floor as fresh agony consumed her. It felt as though someone had reached into her body and ripped out a part of her soul. Everything around her blurred into a well of tears and pain. The days that followed were a surreal nightmare. Chioma moved on as if in a trance, barely eating, barely speaking. People came and went from the apartment. Family members, church folks, neighbors and co-workers, all murmuring condolences that floated over her like distant echoes. She could hardly register the words. Be strong. Some said, God knows the best. Others offered. At one point, she dimly heard someone whisper, God gives and God takes. And a flash of anger tore through her grief. She wanted to scream at them, to ask how they could say such a thing when half of her heart had been cruelly taken away. One evening, about a week after the accident, Chioma found herself sitting on the kitchen floor amid shards of broken glass. She had dropped a drinking glass and hadn't even realized it until she saw the blood from a cut on her hand. She didn't feel the pain. In the next room, she could hear Mama Adeyemi, Seun's mother, wailing in sorrow with relatives trying to console her. He had been her only son. Chioma felt like a ghost drifting through the ruins of her own life, barely present, numb and shattered. They held a funeral service the following week, even though there was no intact body to bury. A polished coffin was draped in white cloth at the front of the church, filled with what remains could be recovered and some of Seun's cherished personal items. The church was overflowing with murmurs. Seun had been well liked, and news of the tragedy had spread far and wide. Chioma sat in front of the church, supported by her father on one side and Nneka on the other. She was dressed in a somber black mourning attire, her head wrapped in a black scarf according to custom. Her face looked hollow, and her eyes were swollen and dry. She had no tears left to shed by then. As the choir softly sang a slow Igbo dirge of farewell, Chioma stared at the coffin in numb disbelief. It felt impossible that this service, this final goodbye, was for her Seun, the lively man who just weeks ago had been laughing with her and holding her close at night. When it came time for tribute, Chioma could barely stand, with Nneka holding her arm for support. She made her way to the lectern with a framed photo of Seun clutched to her chest. In the picture, he was smiling wide and handsome, full of life. Her hand shook so badly that the glass in the frame rattled against the podium. She tried to speak, but her throat tightened. "My husband," she managed to whisper, her voice cracking. The microphone caught a faint sob and a rustle as she steadied herself. He was a good man," she continued haltingly. He made me so happy." A fresh wave of grief hit her, and her vision swam with tears. "I don't know how to live without him," she ended in a broken whisper. Chioma's knees buckled as a sob racked her body, and two relatives quickly stepped forward to hold her upright. She covered her face, overcome. Around the church, many were openly weeping with her. In that moment, it felt as if the entire congregation shared the weight of her sorrow, unified in heartbreak and compassion. After the funeral, Chioma existed in a state of half-life. Days and nights blurred together, each one devoid of meaning. Every morning she would wake in the grey pre-dawn, and for a blissful ignorant second, she would think everything was normal, perhaps even reaching across the bed to feel for Seun. Then the memory of his death would crash down on her anew with merciless force, and the pain would settle heavily in her chest for the rest of the day. His clothes still hung in their closet, exactly where he left them. She couldn't bear to pack them away or give them up. Doing so felt like erasing him. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would sit on the floor of that closet, surrounded by his shirt and jacket, inhaling the lingering scent of his cologne until her tears soaked the fabric. In those moments, the ache of loss was so deep that she felt it in her bones. Concerned for her well-being, Nneka and a few family members took turns staying with Chioma during those first weeks, gently supporting her through the worst of the storm. They coerced her to take a few bites of food or sip water when she forgot to eat. They made sure she bathed and got out of bed at least once a day. Still, many nights, when the apartment was quiet and the weight of the emptiness pressed on her, Chioma would wander into the living room. She often curled up on the sofa, clutching the framed wedding photo of her and Seun. In that photo, they were cutting their cake on their wedding day, both of them laughing with frosting smeared on their noses. A joyful, silly moment frozen in time. Now she would trace a trembling finger over Seun's face under the glass and whisper, "Why, Seun? Why did you leave me?" Sleep was her only escape, and even that offered a little relief. When exhaustion finally dragged her into slumber, her dreams were filled with him. Sometimes she dreamed of their happiest days, walking hand in hand on Bar Beach at sunset, or dancing in their living room. Other times, she relived the nightmare, flashes of fire and screeching metal, waking up with her heart hammering and her cheeks wet with tears. More than once, Chioma bolted upright in the darkness, sure she had just heard the jingle of his keys in the front door, or his familiar voice softly calling her name from the hallway. But each time, she was met only with silence and the dim outline of the furniture. Seun was not there, and the realization caught her anew. As weeks turned into months, the initial flood of visitors and well-wishers gradually thinned. People had to return to their own lives. The world moved on, even if Chioma felt frozen in place. Friends and relatives still checked on her, but with less frequency. Some gently encouraged her to start finding her way back to normalcy, however impossible that seemed. The headmistress of Chioma's school called her one afternoon to express her condolence again and to let her know that whenever she felt ready to return, the school was waiting for her. The children have been asking of her. Auntie Chioma, the headmistress added kindly. Around the same time, Nneka, who worked at the same school, began to visit daily, urging Chioma to take walks outside to get a bit of sun and fresh air. Nneka even offered to accompany her on her first day back, arm in arm, so she wouldn't have to face the staff and students alone. At first, the thought of standing in a classroom again, pretending to be okay, seemed unbearable. How could she smile and teach songs about the alphabet when her heart was in pieces? How could the world expect her to carry on as though everything hadn't fallen apart? There were days she wanted to scream at the sunlight for daring to shine when Seun was dead. But eventually, about 3 months after the funeral, Chioma found herself stepping through the school gates once more. Dressed in a plain dark blue dress, she still wore a black ribbon of mourning pinned discreetly to her chest. Her steps were slow and hesitant, but Nneka walked beside her, squeezing her hand in silent encouragement. The moment Chioma entered her classroom, a chorus of tiny voices rang out. Auntie Chioma! A dozen little children erupted in excitement, some of them clapping, others rushing to hug her legs. The sheer innocence and warmth of their welcome cracked the ice, encasing her heart. Chioma managed a smile, small and trembling, but genuine, and blinked back the sudden tears that sprang to her eyes. She knelt down to embrace the children, letting their chatter wash over her, and realized that if not for her own sake, she had to try to be strong for them. These kids still needed her, still loved her, and in their bright eyes, she found a glimmer of purpose. Slowly, painfully, life regained a semblance of routine. Chioma poured herself into her teaching. Each day was hard, but she discovered that focusing on math problems and storybooks during school hours gave her mind something to hold on to other than grief. She even found herself laughing softly now and then at a child's silly jokes or a drawing proudly thrust into her hands. To the casual observer, she seemed to be healing. But inside, Chioma felt hollow and fragile, as if one wrong touch could shatter her all over again. There were still moments when the pain ambushed her without warning, when she opened a drawer and found one of Seun's handwritten notes saying, "I love you," hidden among her things, or when she heard a high-life song on the radio that he used to sing along to in the car. Sometimes, while walking home, she would catch a glimpse of a tall man in a crowd who looked like Seun from behind, and her heart would leap foolishly for one beat before reality set in. On particularly hard days, she would slip into an empty classroom during lunch break and let the tears come, biting down on her knuckles to muffle her sobs. She didn't want to upset the children or attract pity from colleagues. So she grieved in stolen private moments whenever the ache became too much to bear. Still, she persevered. With time, the raw wound in her heart began to form a scar. By the 6-month mark after Seun's death, Chioma could say his name without immediately breaking down. She could even bring herself to visit his grave, an empty grave with a headstone next to his late father's, where she laid fresh flowers and spoke to the air, telling him how much she missed him. Through all of this, one question continued to nag quietly at the back of Chioma's mind. Though she tried to push it away. Why? Why had Seun been on that particular highway at that exact terrible moment? He was such a careful driver, the type to avoid reckless truckers and bad roads. It felt like such a cruel twist of fate. On nights when sleep eluded her, she would stare at the ceiling and torment herself with unanswerable doubts. Had he suffered in those final seconds? Did he see the crash coming? Did he have any last thought of her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but she knew she might never truly know the answers. With a heavy heart, she tried to accept that some questions would remain forever unanswered. Little did Chioma know that the answers and the astonishing truths behind the tragic day were yet to come. While Chioma grieved, Seun Adeyemi was very much alive. On the day of the supposed accident, after leaving his home and the woman who loved him, Seun drove not toward Benin City, but to a desolate stretch of the road off the main highway. His heart pounded and his palms were sleek on the steering wheel as he went over the plan in his mind. Every detail had to be right. He had chosen a spot where the road curved sharply and the dense bushes lined the sides, a place where accidents were sadly not uncommon. With a deep breath and trembling fingers, he took off his gold wedding ring and the anniversary wristwatch Chioma had gifted him. For a moment, he stared at those precious items in his palm. A wave of guilt and doubt crashed over him. What was he doing? In that instant, an image of Chioma's smiling face flashed in his mind. Her trusting eyes as she waved goodbye to him that very morning. His resolve nearly broke. He clutched the ring so hard it bit into his skin. It's too late to turn back. He muttered to himself, voice shaking. If he didn't go through with this, the people he owed money would destroy him and perhaps hurt Chioma too. At least this way, he told himself, she would be saved from his mess. She could mourn, yes, but then maybe she could move on and have a better life without the burden he had become. Under the grey afternoon sky, Seun placed the ring and the watch on the driver's seat along with his briefcase and a few personal papers that would identify him. His throat tightened as he arranged them to be clearly found. Each item felt like a farewell. He whispered, "I'm sorry," as if somehow Chioma's spirit could hear him, then stepped away. He had already doused parts of the car's interior with extra foil. With a shaking hand, He lit a rag and dropped it onto the soaked upholstery from the open driver's door. Whoosh! Within seconds, flames leaked up, orange and violent. Heat seared his face as he stumbled back. The fire caught quickly, engulfing the front seat. Black smoke billowed into the sky. Shehu turned and ran through the bushes toward a dirt lane where a second-hand motorcycle he had purchased waited, hidden earlier that day. As he gunned the motorcycle bike to life and sped away, cross-country, tears streamed down his face, whether it was from the acrid smoke stinging his eyes or the weight of what he had just done. Even he couldn't tell. He did not look back at the column of smoke rising behind him like a signal of his own death. In the following weeks, Shehu vanished from Lagos. He left behind everything: his home, his business, his friends, and the wife he had vowed to love forever. News of the accident was likely dominating conversations back in his old neighborhood, but he forced himself not to dwell on it. He couldn't bear to imagine Chioma's face or the agony she must be going through. Whenever the thought of her crept in, he numbed them by focusing on the road ahead. Shehu traveled north under the cover of anonymity. With some cash he had secretly stashed, he moved from town to town for a while, staying in cheap hotels, using a fake name, and keeping a low profile. Every night, alone in a strange bed, he was haunted by nightmares of Chioma's cries. More than once, he awoke sweating and heart pounding, with her name on his lips. But come morning, he would steel himself again. There was no undoing what he had set in motion. After a few months, Shehu settled into the capital city, Abuja, far from the meddling eyes of anyone who might recognize him. He grew out a beard and started going by Kunle, a middle name he never used before. Whenever he had to introduce himself, using what little funds he had left, he partnered with a small transport company under his new identity, applying the skills he had from running his Lagos business. The work was hard, but it kept him busy, and more importantly, it kept him under the radar. It was in Abuja that he met Amara. Their paths crossed at a pharmacy, of all places, where Shehu, now Kunle, was picking up headache medicine. Amara was the pharmacist who handed him the pills with a polite smile. She was a soft-spoken, compassionate woman with bright, inquisitive eyes. In the weeks that followed, he found excuses to visit the pharmacy regularly, drawn to the kindness in her face and the gentle way she asked, "How are you doing today?" He learned that Amara had moved to the city not long ago for her job. She was originally from Owerri in Igbo land, and like Chioma, she had a certain warmth and generosity about her. But unlike with Chioma, Shehu felt no history, no guilt with Amara. He had a blank slate. He told her a bit of his fabricated story, that he was an only child, that his parents were deceased, and that he had spent some years abroad, which explained why he had few friends around and sometimes stumbled over details of local happenings. He did not mention ever being married. In this new life, he was a bachelor looking for stability, or so he portrayed. Loneliness and the desire for a fresh start drew Shehu and Amara closer. Within 6 months, they were dating seriously. Each time Amara laughed at his jokes or rested her head on his shoulder during a movie, Shehu felt a confusing mix of comfort and pangs of conscience. He tried to push thoughts of Chioma away, telling himself that that chapter was closed, and that Chioma would have certainly been able to move on by now too. But in the quiet moments, when Amara fell asleep on his chest, he would stare at the ceiling. and feel the hollowness of the lies he was living. Still, he continued on that path. About a year after his disappearance from Lagos, under his assumed identity, Cheo married Amara in a small court ceremony. There was no elaborate celebration. He claimed to Amara that he preferred something quiet and that he had only a few distant relatives who couldn't attend. Amara's own family, delighted that their daughter had found a loving husband, traveled in from Owerri. Cheo felt a stab of shame as her aging parents thanked him with tears in their eyes for making their daughter happy. He forced a smile and accepted their hugs, all the while hearing an inner voice sneering at him. If they knew the truth, they would call you a monster. Despite the deceit at its foundation, Cheo's new life with Amara was almost peaceful for a time. They rented a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Abuja. He woke up each morning to the aroma of Amara's coffee and her bright good morning love. She was an attentive wife, massaging his shoulders when he came home tired and celebrating his small business successes. In turn, he tried to be the doting husband she deserved, at least outwardly. Sometimes, in those early days of marriage, he almost convinced himself that he could truly leave the past behind, that perhaps he deserved this second chance at happiness. But the past has a way of catching up. One morning, Cheo sat in the living room while Amara prepared breakfast in the kitchen. He flipped on the television to catch the news. As he sipped his coffee, a talk show was coming on, one of those national morning programs. The cheerful host, Fumi Adewale, announced, "Today we have a special guest with us, a brave young widow who has turned her personal tragedy into a source of inspiration for others. Please welcome Mrs. Chioma Nwosu." Cheo's cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the tiled floor, coffee splattering his slippers. He felt the blood drain from his face. There on the TV screen was Chioma, his Chioma, live on national television. She looked thinner and a bit pale, but still achingly familiar. She wore a simple navy dress and a calm, composed expression. The host gently prompted her with questions. At the bottom of the screen, a caption read, "Widow turns grief into hope. Chioma Nwosu on life after loss." Cheo's heart slammed against his chest. He was frozen, crouched half out of his seat, ignoring the hot coffee seeping into his slippers. In the kitchen, Amara heard the cup shatter and poked her head out. "Kunle, are you okay? What happened?" she asked, concerned. His mind raced. He fumbled for the remote and quickly turned off the television. The image of Chioma blinking out to a black screen. I'm fine," he stammered, forcing a smile that he hoped looked apologetic rather than terrified. I just dropped my mug. Clumsy me." Amara stepped over and glanced at the mess on the floor. "Oh no, are you hot?" she exclaimed, grabbing a dish towel to dab at the spilled coffee and pick up the larger ceramic shards. "I'm alright," Cheo lied, bending down to help, but with hands that still trembled. His heart was thudding so loudly he feared she might hear it. He kept his eyes averted, praying she hadn't seen or heard anything from the TV. It didn't seem she had. The volume had been low. As Amara disposed of the broken pieces and went to fetch the mop, she studied him with a gentle frown. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Was it just the spill or did something else happen?" "You're white as a sheet." Cheo swallowed hard. I just remembered something unpleasant from work. That's all. I'm sorry I made a mess." She reached out and rubbed his arm reassuringly. "It's okay. Accidents happen," she said softly. "Why don't you go wash up? breakfast is almost ready." He nodded and muted the thanks, escaping to the bathroom. The moment the door closed behind him, Cheung gripped the sink basin and hung his head, his entire body shaking. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, the face of a man who should have been dead, now flushed with panic. Seeing Chioma alive and well, not just alive, but speaking publicly, rattled him to the core. His mind replayed the snippet he saw. Chioma sitting poised, hand clasped tightly in her lap. The host had said she turned her tragedy into inspiration. What did that mean? What was she doing? His stomach churned with guilt as he imagined what she might have said. Was she talking about him? He could only imagine the lies she had been told, the narrative of his tragic death that she had believed for over a year. In that brief glimpse, she had seemed composed, even strong. A far cry from the broken woman he left sobbing on the floor of their living room in his nightmares. Somehow, she had picked up the pieces of her life he shattered. There was a punch in his chest, part sorrow, part something like pride in her resilience, but it was quickly overtaken by cold dread. What if she somehow discovered the truth? No, he reassured himself. She couldn't possibly. He had been so careful. There was no trail leading to Abuja. No one who knew both of his identities. He had even changed his phone number and avoided social media entirely. Chioma was simply moving on with her life, just as he wanted for her. He should feel relieved to see her doing well. Yet, all he felt was an overwhelming mix of shame and fear. In the kitchen, he heard Amara humming a tune as she set the table. He took several deep breaths and splashed water on his face. He had to pull himself together. There was no way to explain any of this to anyone. He needed to act normal. Jill returned to the dining area, forcing down the turmoil inside. Over breakfast, he barely touched his food. He nodded absently as Amara chatted about an upcoming visit from her cousin. His mind was elsewhere, still in shock. He kept hearing Chioma's voice in his head, recalling the soft way she used to call him "my love" in the mornings. Now she was calling him late husband in public, perhaps telling the world what a wonderful man he had been. The bitter irony made him want to crawl out of his skin. That day at work, Cheung couldn't focus. He found himself snapping at a colleague and then apologizing, blaming a headache. By evening, he was jumpy and irritable, causing Amara to ask if he was feeling ill. He claimed he was just tired. Late that night, when Amara was asleep, Cheung crept out of bed into the living room. In the darkness, he turned the TV back on with the volume muted, hoping perhaps the channel might rerun segments or that the news ticker might mention Chioma's appearance. There was nothing. He stared at the blank blue glow of the screen after broadcast had ended, his mind racing. It dawned on him that Chioma's public appearance could attract attention. What if someone from Abuja who knew him in this new life somehow saw it and put two and two together? The chance was slim, but it gnawed at him. He resolved to keep an even lower profile for a while. No unnecessary socialization. Avoid crowded public places. He couldn't risk anyone seeing a resemblance if they had also watched that program. As he finally went back to bed, sleeping under the covers beside Amara, Cheung tried to calm his pounding heart. It was just a TV show, he told himself. Chioma was moving on, just like he wanted. She would never know he was out there, watching. Their worlds would remain separate. They had to. For Chioma, Life had begun to acquire a fragile normalcy in the months following her television appearance. She had shared her story on the morning show, hoping to help others experiencing loss. The experience was cathartic. Speaking about her pain and her journey towards healing made her feel less alone. And perhaps it honored Shehu's memory in a way. She returned home after the interview feeling strangely lighter, unaware that her words had set unforeseen events into motion. A week later, on a Sunday afternoon, Chioma heard a hesitant knock on her apartment door. When she opened it, she was astonished to find Tunde standing there. His face was pale and drawn, a stark contrast to his usual jovial demeanor. Chioma's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen much of Tunde since the funeral. His appearance now, unannounced, made her instinctively brave herself for bad news. "Tunde, is everything alright?" she asked, voice tight with concern. She motioned for him to come in. Tunde stepped inside, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. He simply stared at Chioma, anguish and uncertainty in his eyes.